Welcome to Pick Up and Delivered, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a lovely Friday morning here in suburban Chicago. The construction crews are hard at work. I don't know if you've noticed, but the volume from those crews when I'm walking is significantly lower because they've significantly finished the work along my street. All of the house building and everything that's going on now is in the back behind those houses. And so as a result, I'm not having to wrestle with as much construction noise here on the podcast, and thus neither are you. I have to admit, I didn't have a clear idea at the beginning about what to talk about board games today. And then, apropos of nothing in particular, I decided I'd do an episode about sore losers. I don't actually have that much experience with sore losers, so I'm actually then, as soon as I decided that, I was going to reframe it into being a good sport. So the phrase good sport or good sportsmanship has to do with playing honorably and playing the way within the spirit of playing a game and doing your best to encourage the feeling of solid play and enjoyment of the game. Along those lines, I thought of 5 things I'd like to talk about that help encourage being a good sport in gameplay. So the first of these is the game needs to feel fair. And there are a variety of different ways that this can happen. First off, a well-balanced or well-designed game will feel fair and encourage players to be a good sport. That a game that feels like it is treating you appropriately, a game that feels like it's designed to be helpful, works really well. By contrast, a game that cheats, or a game that feels like it's a cheat, will often encourage bad feelings, which can lead to bad sports. For example, the game Ghost Stories often gets talked about as a game that's ridiculously hard, and people will talk about it as unfair. There are other games where we curse the randomness built into the game. Dead of Winter, for instance, makes us feel bad about that. However, when a game feels unfair or feels like it cheats us, it doesn't necessarily make us bad sports. I think one of the key components that makes us be a bad sport or makes the game feel unfair is the idea that other players are being unfairly treated by the game, right? Because fairness has to do with our interactions with the system. A game that's hard isn't inherently unfair. A game that treats players differently is unfair, which is why you hear about balance being a bigger concern among players in terms of how well they do. That things that are unbalanced feel unfair. For example, one of our family's more enjoyable tableau builders is, what's it called? The game about libraries. Oh no, I've hit the point. I have too many game names in my head and I lose them now. The game about arranging a magical library. It'll come to me. In that game, if you're playing with the normal mode rather than the beginner mode, you get a sorcerer power that then gives you an extra ability to do something. And in our plays, we found these sorcerer powers are widely unbalanced. That because a big part of the game is the race to shelve as many books as you can, if you have a library power or a player power that lets you shelve extra books, you can accumulate way more books on your shelf than players who don't have that power. And it's really easy to pull ahead, to the point that in our box of the game, we have divided up the 2 sections of the library, or the 2 kinds of powers into strong powers and weak powers, just to specifically avoid that problem. The other way that a game feels unfair is if there's a player who knows a lot more about the game than another player. And this isn't a fault with the game, but rather a fault with the dynamics of playing. Now, sometimes we just recognize a player who knows more is more likely to win. And that's not necessarily seen as unfair. But I think we see a balance in these 2 things, because a player who is more experienced, who then consistently plays players without experience and then enjoys clobbering them, that is seen as an element of unfair or being a poor sport. To actively seek out players who are much less skilled than you and then trounce them, I would say is not being a good sport, even if it is within the spirit of the game and the rules of the game. It also depends on the situation. You know, playing in casual play against someone much less experienced than you and clobbering them is not being a good sport. It's rude. Playing in a tournament and clobbering someone much less experienced than you, well, the whole point of the tournament is a higher level of competition. And so one shouldn't expect generous play in a competitive environment as opposed to a casual environment. So that's my thinking about when games are fair or unfair. Of course, a huge part is you can't cheat. And it's not fun to play with people who cheat. Now, I regularly, in our playing of games, allow for situations where players could cheat. That when I'm playing a Euro game, especially a game with a lot of resource management, we all often make our own bank, right? Which could allow for cheating, both intentional and accidental. We played a game of London last week, which, boy, I like that game. And there was an awful lot of, as people are taking their turns, it's on tabletop simulators, so you can't really see everything everybody's doing. And so it's hard to get a sense of when people are or aren't paying the right amount or doing the right thing. And it's easy to lose track of that. We did just all kind of keep an eye on each other, and that's really helpful because then you can say, hey, did you discard a card to play that? Or did you pay your $2 or whatever? And that worked out fine. Probably the over-under of that is that we all make little mistakes when we're doing that sort of thing, but it makes for a more enjoyable play rather than having to very carefully scrutinize every single thing every person does. But it also leaves room for someone to actively cheat. And that would not be fun. I've heard a lot of gamers suggest that they just wouldn't play with people who cheat. The cheating is not okay at their table, and if there is someone who cheats, well, that person's not going to be welcome to play with them. And I sort of feel that way as well. A player who cheats is ruining the spirit of the game. I would say another kind of bad sport is somebody who takes advantage of gaps in rules knowledge. And there's a big difference here between someone who does something on purpose and someone who does something accidentally. I say that as someone who probably does that accidentally more than I would like. But so one of the things that often happens is that a player who's played a game a lot will know things about how the game works that give them a distinct tactical advantage. And I would say one of the ways to make your opponents feel like things were unfair is to not very carefully explain that tactical advantage. So, as a rules teacher, when I'm teaching games, I always make sure to right up front, the very beginning, explain how you win the game. In part, that comes from my own bad experience playing unfair at Origins 2017. You could tell that this rankles my craw because it sits so strongly. So my daughter and I and another person joined a fourth person for a game of unfair, and apparently he had bought it at Origins. He loved it. He was playing it just kind of nonstop. So it's not surprising we thought he would win. And he explains the game to us, and at some point he must have explained the scoring. But he didn't explain it very well, or I missed it. Probably a little of both. I think he didn't explain it very well, though, because none of the three players who weren't him took a strategy that suggested we understood how the final scoring worked. Because in the end, in this game, the single biggest factor in your points was how tall your structures are. That having several short structures was nowhere near as good as having one really tall one. And he didn't really explain that. I mean, he may have said enough words that we could have inferred it. But that's generally the sort of thing that I would call out. I would say, like when I teach London, I say, and then at the end we lose poverty. The way that works is whoever has the least amount of poverty, everyone discards that much, and then you take a penalty for all the poverty you have beyond that. It's a huge penalty and often will swing the game. I myself have lost 20 or 30 points at a time doing it that way. Like, I will highlight the fact that the poverty is often the biggest factor in the game. If you are teaching the game and you fail to disclose elements like that, I don't feel like that's great, and often your players will feel bad. On top of it, if you leave out a rule, intentionally or not, that can result in some really bad feelings. I remember a game of Biblios I played once where I did not know what the tiebreaker was. And at some point somebody said, well, does money do anything? And I'm like, I don't think so. And they spent all their money. And then at the end of the game, it was a tie. And it turned out money left over was the tiebreaker. And that person who said, does money do anything, was really mad at me. Even though I contend here that had they not spent all their money, they would not have had the things they needed to get to the tie. But there it is. Maybe they could have spent one less dollar. I don't know. But I did feel really bad because as the rules explainer, you don't want anyone to go, well, like, oh, I didn't know it worked that way. I have become more self-assured about that sort of thing. When I'm teaching a complicated game, I make a checklist of things to cover. And so when somebody ultimately says, well, I didn't understand that worked, I say, well, I did explain it, but it's a teaching game, so live and learn. Sometimes we'll let somebody walk something. Actually, I almost always offer to let someone walk something back in a teaching game, because if they didn't understand how something worked, there it is. I myself have been trying really hard in the last few months to get away from ever walking anything back. When I take a move, that's my move. If I didn't think it through or didn't understand it, well, too bad. I think that makes for more fun play. Okay, so those are things that I think set up the situation for people feeling good about a game. Now I want to talk about, as a player, what are some things that you can do to help keep the game positive, to be a good sport as a player rather than as a teacher or as a situation builder. And there are two, I think, that are really crucial. One is what I'll call trying to win, and the other is handicapping. Now, handicapping is sort of closely related to the issue of the player who knows more than the other players. If you have played a game a lot, and it's a complicated game that has a lot of difficulty or whatever, and you're playing with people who haven't played a lot, or ever. Well, if they haven't played a lot, that's one thing, but haven't played ever, if you're the teacher, then I firmly believe you should help people a little bit with significant issues, or ask if they want help. So like, for instance, in Azul, I don't know, see, Azul is one of those games that's so tactical that if you start telling people about things, then you start alpha gaming. Really just, offering key bits of advice for things that people may not see down the road. Like, okay, I see an anachrony. Okay, just remember in rounds 5 and 6, you're going to need to spend energy cores. You want to make sure you have some. Making sure to say that a couple times as the game goes along is really a crucial thing, because the game gets really unfun if you miss that. So that's one kind of handicapping. The other one, and the one that I meant to talk about, was to find a way for yourself as the more experienced player to play the game, have fun, and handicap yourself a little bit. So I've heard other people talk about the idea that they will pursue an alternate strategy, right? If I usually win anachrony by really focusing on the time travel element and the morale, maybe this time I'll focus on super projects. See if I can win using super projects. The short answer is no, you can't. Not in the base game. Maybe some of the later games make them better, but in the base game, the super projects are too expensive. But anyway, so, thinking about how do I keep the game fun for myself, still put forth effort, but also have it be fun for people who are a lot less experienced than I am. Another example is in Welcome To, they have this set of achievement card that I think it comes with one of them. I printed out more, and then I have my name on mine, and each other person I have their name on it, where they have a thing in Welcome To where if you win the game, you can then mark off an achievement if you managed it. And the achievements are things like fill in all the pools, fill in all the parks. It's like an extra layer of difficulty that you add to yourself that doesn't change how you play the game with others, but maybe makes you make choices that would be suboptimal if you weren't playing with that goal. And then, you might not end up winning, but the other people still got to pursue their goal as best they could and enjoy themselves, and you haven't disrupted the game. You've maybe altered who would have won if you aren't aiming for exactly the same goals they are, but it becomes really fun. The place where I would say that that's not ideal, and the thing that I find not really fun, is if at some point you realize you can't win, then pursuing some other level of fun is not my favorite. So, king-making. This is often called king-making. The idea that if you figured out you can't win or you're unlikely to win, you could make an effort that helps secure the win for one player or another. And that part I find frustrating. But, I think that goes to philosophy of gameplay. There are some people who think that there's one winner and several losers. And it doesn't really matter which place you come in as a loser. There are other people who think being second is better than being third. And I think those attitudes result in very different play. That if you feel like the only thing you can do, the only thing that matters is winning, then whenever you get the opportunity, you should try to pull yourself closer to the winner, which often means pulling the winner down if it's a competitive game. However, depending on the game, sometimes pulling the winner down means the second place person gets to win instead of the first place person. And you haven't actually improved your own setting at all. So in that argument, for people who believe that the place matters, then actually going after the second place person would make more sense. That the second place person is going after the first place, and you're going after the second place. And I think either of those is fine. Now, how you react to that play is difficult. And this is where I think it's in highly competitive games like this that sportspersonship becomes really important. The other thing about Euro games, the ones that have sort of passive aggressiveness, where you take the thing the other person wanted, that those games can have could result in very poor sportspersonship. I've played a number of games before where they have some sort of limited thing that happens, and you take a thing someone else wants, and they could be very upset. And I've had that happen to me, where somebody takes the thing I really wanted, and I just get very upset. And sometimes I'm able to control it. Sometimes I say part of it or whatever, and it's all in good fun. You can't carry the grudge at all. But those hard feelings that come from competitive play are part of gameplay, and learning to manage those is a crucial part of being a good sport. So the final thing I want to mention is something I'm sure you've heard before. It is widely circulated in board games, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves every now and again. And this is the famous quote from Reiner Knizia, designer of many, many games, including favorites for me like Lost Cities. I'd say Lost Cities is my favorite Reiner Knizia game, although we really like Indigo. We just picked up My City. I'm keen to see how that works. I have a bunch of them. So he said, "When playing a game, the goal is to win, but it is the goal that is important, not the winning." And I love that philosophy. The idea, right, is that you should be trying to win. As in playing a game, if you're not trying to win, you are often disrupting the game. Playing the game for some other purpose other than trying to win damages the game, often. But at the same time, it's the striving to win that is the key part of the game. Whether or not you actually do win is much less important. And there's the thing that really causes the strife in bad sports, is people for whom the actual winning becomes important to them and can't handle it when they don't win. Like I said, this topic came to me this week, apropos of nothing in particular, but thinking about the idea that when you're in a contest of some sort and it doesn't go your way, it speaks a lot to your character, how you react to that loss. Do you stand up and say, "Well fought, well done, sir or madam," or do you complain that somehow you were cheated and complain that the game is unfair and make everybody miserable? You don't want to be that person. Well, going into the weekend, we have a game day coming up. I'm very excited. We've got some games ready to be on the table. Looking forward to playing some games with friends. What are you up to? Please let me know over on Board Game Geek and Guild 3269. I'm always keen to hear from you, dear listeners. We are well into November now, which means we're in our final run up to the end of the year. I'm keen to hear, what do you anticipate for the next couple of months? Did you look at Spiel? What games that came out at Spiel are you excited about? I think in the coming weeks I'm going to do a Christmas Who I Bought Games For and Why episode, because none of my family listens to my podcast, so I can give that away. Although I think my mom does, but she doesn't. I don't generally get her games because we have plenty, and she would never play them if not at our house, except for bridge. She plays a lot of bridge. But that's neither here nor there. So swing over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know what you think of this episode, or reach out, Brendan at Rattlebox Games. I'm keen to hear from you. I always enjoy hearing from listeners and getting ideas for shows. I appreciate those of you who have written in this year, offering ideas. And with that, I'm going to say good day. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.